House come to order if members can take their seats.
This budget is a huge job maker, and the number one solution to economic insecurity is a job.
Hungry children can't learn, and it's our responsibility to try to help.
Equality and opportunity.
I believe most people are here because they want to do some good.
It's a good day because there's a brand new episode of Capital Ideas to dig into. This is the podcast where members of the majority Democratic caucus in the Washington State House of Representatives sit down at the Capitol in Olympia and talk about ideas. We kicked off season 18 with a visit from Representative Lisa Callan, and if you haven't heard it yet, you really should. But first, you can spend 20 minutes today with Representative Chipalo Street. He has a lot to say about a lot of issues, and it's all worth hearing. After our conversation, I'll have some important news about Capital Ideas. In the meantime, here's Representative Chipalo Street. We recorded this on Tuesday, January 20th, 2026, and here we go. Welcome back to Capital Ideas, Representative Chipalo Street from the 37th District in the heart of Seattle. It's been not very long since you were here. I believe you were about the next to last interview that we did during the 2025 session. In fact, it was the night of the final gavel of the 2025 session. What I want to do today is kind of start from there and keep going.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for having me back.
What's up?
Oh, man, a lot's been up. So when we got out of session this past session, as many of us remember, there was a big to-do about the budget and getting money for things and what taxes we were going to pass. We got out of here with our budget hole closed, understanding that we have structural issues going forwards. And I think we can spend some time on like what we're going to do about that in the future. The thing that I would sort of mention about the interim is that despite our budget issues, we were able to secure, I think it was about $350,000 for a state study into what reparations for descendants of chattel slavery would look like. And that, I think, in itself is historic. It's the first time that we as a state have put money towards looking at reparations. I think we're the third state in the country to do so as well. But it was also like a starting point. We got King County to put in money. I believe Snohomish County's looking at money. So we started a larger movement within various counties, cities, and statewide to look at that. And that's been a larger conversation that's been happening over the interim.
Has that study begun, or is it still in the process of raising money to fund this?
We're in the beginning of starting that study. So the progress that's been made is a research entity has been chosen by Department of Commerce and the Commission on African American Affairs. And so I believe they are finalizing that contract and scope. And then that research entity will go off and start doing the research that's needed.
This went totally over my head last session, so I'm really looking forward to hearing more about this.
Yeah, I think it's a good example of how there's many things that we do via bills and legislation, which is great, but there are other venues and mechanisms and vehicles for driving change, and that could be through provisos or budget items, or even just bringing agencies to the table to talk and maybe work on existing legislation, provide them new direction, or implement new studies to look at things that we want to do in the future.
Was that a proviso? How did that
ultimately,
work?
It was a proviso. So we went back and forth between, are we going to do a bill? Are we going to do a proviso? Is it going to be a House vehicle, Senate vehicle? There was tons and tons of work, but we ended up getting the money in the budget, which was the ultimate goal. And then other jurisdictions have picked up and sort of teamed up with the state.
Reparations for slavery and the wrongs done during that period of American history is something I've been hearing about since I was a little kid, but I always wondered, is this ever going to take place?
I think a lot of people feel that way. And I mean, even myself, when I hear reparations, I think of a very hard goal, something that's never been done before. But when you look at history, like we have, as a country, done reparations for other groups. We've done reparations for like Japanese Americans who were interned. There's 3 or 4 other groups. I mean, even slave owners were given reparations when their slaves were taken away at the end of slavery. So it's something that we have done as a country, and it doesn't take away. Like, out of those two examples, I think one is far more deserving of reparations than the other. But like we have been able to do these things. We've been able to do hard things as a country before. And so I hope this is the start of us being able to rectify a wrong, because I think that is a wrong that everyone recognizes. What we do about it and how we help to repair it where there may be more disagreement.
Let's talk about this year a little bit. Obviously, you've got some new bills, but you've got some bills from last year that have carried forward. And I wonder, which of those are you going to kind of say, that's one of my priorities this year?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that in a sort of roundabout way. I assume that question was more about my personal bills, but I'm going to answer that in terms of us as a caucus. Many times when people ask, what are your priorities for this session, they're looking forward. One of the things I like to bring up is what I would consider one of the failures of our last session that we didn't deal with, that I think we need to urgently deal with immediately, which is our JR population. So that's juvenile rehabilitation. If folks aren't familiar, there is Green Hill. There's a couple other youth detention facilities that are far over population. Like this is resulting in kids being in their cells 23 hours a day, not necessarily being able to go to the bathroom, having to go to the bathroom in plastic bottles. When I think about populations that are dependent on the state, there are folks who are incarcerated, there are foster care folks. Like those are people that we have to be responsible for, and we are not doing our job there. We had two competing bills that we were trying to pass as a package last session. The compromise there fell apart and neither of them passed. And so we have to do something this session to alleviate those overcrowding problems. So that's a short-term thing that we need to get done immediately. Another thing that I think we sort of started touching on last session and has been one of the themes of why I came to Olympia and would like to get done in Washington State is addressing our regressive tax code. This past session, we did a bunch of tax reform in both new revenue that we passed as well as some cuts that were made that fixed that budget hole, but our overall budget has structural issues in terms of how we raise revenue and how we keep up with increasing costs. Right now, our main sources of revenue are sales tax, some property tax, and B&O tax. A missing leg of that stool is income tax. And so this session, there will be a bill on income tax for people who make over $1 million a year. And I think that's a great way to start making our tax code in Washington State more progressive. And when we say progressive, it's not necessarily like left-wing progressive versus right-wing. I mean, it ends up being sort of like Democrat, Republican take sides on it, but progressive, not in the traditional definition of progressive politics, but progressive in terms of we want everyone to pay the same proportion of their income to taxes, so that right now when you say a regressive tax system, that means that the people who make the least pay the highest portion of their income to taxes, which is sort of structurally unfair.
I know that you can't predict how that's going to go because that's why we're all here, is to figure out how it's going to go. What's your gut feeling on the success of the millionaire's tax?
I'm optimistic. I mean, I would just compare it to some of sort of the process that we went through last session to pass new revenue. We started off there, I think, with the House, the Senate, and the governor's office on different pages about what would be the best way to do that, specifics of how to do it, where that money would go. I think this session you're seeing more alignment about the way in which that's done. I think there's still definitely questions about how much, where does it go. Everyone seems to be aligned on a millionaire's income tax. We all seem to be aligned on wanting to reduce other taxes as part of this. It's not just net new revenue. It's also how do we reduce existing taxes that are already out there that may be overburdening small businesses or low-income folks. And so I think it's more of the devil's in the details as opposed to what are we going to do? It's more of how are we going to do it and what does that look like?
I sure wish I was in a position to have to pay that tax.
So do I. That would be a great problem to have.
That's not going to be the only big revenue bill that the Finance Committee needs to wrestle with this session. Do you want to touch on any of the others, or is it too speculative at this point?
Yeah, a lot of bills come through finance, some larger than others. Another larger bill that's coming through finance this session is proposed by Representative Sean Scott. It is similar to Seattle's head tax, which is a tax on salaries, high earning salaries that a employer would pay. That's been a tax that's been implemented in Seattle for maybe 4 or 5 years now. Actually, Seattle used it to balance their budget very recently. So it's been relatively successful in the city, and there is now a proposal to do that at a statewide.
Now, to hear the Republicans talk about this, you would think that now that Seattle's had that for 4 or 5 years, that there's no more companies left in Seattle because they all moved to Texas.
Mm-hmm. Well, my impression is that's been raising more and more money, and it was used again to balance Seattle's budget. So, like, you can use numbers to make many different cases. So it'll be interesting to see the numbers that different folks use. I mean, I think there's many ways to look at these things, and that will be an interesting conversation to be had in addition to the high earners income tax and any other different revenue options that come through finance. I think the thing that will be taken into account as we talk about all of these revenue bills is that, be it the head tax or be it the high earners tax, those are things that we won't be able to realize that money for till like 2029 or maybe even 2028 at the earliest. And so that's not going to fix any short-term budget holes that we have. That is a significant amount of services. And we just made a bunch of cuts the last session. The cuts that we would have to make this session to close $1 billion budget hole would be even more painful. Like, that is real money to real Washingtonians and would cause real pain. And so we're going to have to make some hard choices about, do we find other taxes that exist that we raise? Do we implement a different tax that is we would more quickly be able to realize the revenue from, so we don't have to make such painful cuts to existing services to close those short-term budget gaps? And so I think there's going to be some longer-term taxation conversations and some shorter-term taxation and cuts conversations to make sure that we can get out of here with a balanced budget.
I know that every few years there is an effort to review and evaluate the tax preferences that the legislature has established over the years to encourage this or that result. I suppose you'll probably be looking at that again.
Yeah, and that was part of last year's revenue and tax and cuts conversation. So these conversations just get harder and harder. And that's why I'm at least encouraged that we're talking about structural tax reform, even if it's 4 years out, because I would expect these types of conversations to continue to happen when just something as simple as inflation rises faster than our revenue is.
I want to change the subject here, if you don't mind. I was looking at one of your bills that, I guess I'm a nerd. This made me so excited to see this bill. And that had to do with housing in commercial and industrial areas, which is something that I've been jabbering to people about for years. I love the fact that you're sponsoring a bill that would accomplish this kind of reform when we need housing so badly.
Yeah, well, let's first give credit to Senator Alvarado and the governor. Like, this is a companion bill to work that they've been pushing. So, like, they get a ton of credit for doing a bunch of legwork. I'm happy to support, like, completely believe in this policy. And I think I see that as a combination of things that we've done previously in terms of regulation, in terms of housing. For example, doing rent stabilization, which puts a cap on how much rents can increase in a year. Look at the market side of housing. When it's estimated that we need like 1 million houses or something at an average of like $400,000 or $500,000 a unit, it's a crazy amount of money. And to think that the government's going to be able to solve that, like, it's just not. It doesn't pencil. And so we need to incentivize the private market to do that. And so what this bill does is says, hey, if you have a commercially zoned area, a city or county can't preclude residential housing from being built in that area, so that it opens up more land for housing. And it also says that right now, currently when you build a mixed-use building, you have to have the first floor for commercial. It says, hey, if the developer thinks that they can get more money by putting residential on that first floor, by all means, go for it. Like, we want to be able to let the developers in the market dictate what's going to be built. And if it pencils for them, that's great. It's more housing. Why should we put up a fuss about that?
And there are reasonable exceptions here. I noticed that, you're not going to be able to put up a high-rise condo next to an oil refinery, that kind of thing. But overall, it seems like such a good idea that I will be watching this bill from a distance, and good luck.
Yeah, thanks. We really we need to do everything that we can to increase housing. And part of that is addressing the market side of it, because the more we build, the faster the prices will come down. We can't regulate our way out of high rents. We really need to have available and abundant housing.
I'll change the subject a lot today, and right now I want to shift over to something we talked about in our previous conversation, which was the establishment of a state bank here in Washington. I think there's one other state that has one. Washington could be number two because it seems like the first one is pretty successful. On the other hand, there's a lot of opposition for some reason, or else we would have one already. What's going on with this?
Yeah, that's a good example of one of those things that has bicameral and bipartisan support. Senator Hasselgawa has been advocating for a state bank for a number of years. Over in the House, found out that Rep. Chase from Spokane, who's a Republican, as well as Rep. Parsley from here in Olympia, is really excited about a state bank. And so I'm optimistic that we'll be able to move towards having a state bank because, as you mentioned, I believe it's North Dakota has a state bank, and it is very popular, weathered the financial crisis better than most commercial banks. So I think there's a lot of various ways in which it could be structured, but the main idea is that we leverage state funds to make low interest grants to folks improving the state, and we can sort of decide how that improvement happens, be it we limit it to green projects, expand it to transpo projects, but providing access to capital so that folks can do projects.
Here's something that I believe you have a bill on this year, and it's the kind of thing that if you stopped 85 people on the street and asked them what was a pressing issue, 84 of them might not come up with this answer. But when you think about the people it affects, it's very serious. And it has to do with phone money for people who are being held prisoner in this state. It has nothing to do with whether they deserve to be there or not. Tell me about that problem.
This is actually a topic that I still am relatively ignorant of, but was brought to me by a constituent. And so I always try and, when constituents bring me great ideas, I always try and prioritize those as well in my legislative work. And so kudos to those folks who brought me the bill. Right now, my understanding is that inmates have a commissary account, which is what they can use to buy personal hygiene products, toothpaste, maybe even phone calls and things like that. When that account gets below $25, it can't be reduced and is only used for those purposes. However, if you have more than $25 in that, you can start taking fees and LFOs out of it. And that then puts a hardship on individuals once they get down to $25 because you can't buy too much with $25. And once you're under $25, then folks start trying to find other ways to acquire those products in the prison, which usually involves violence or coercion. And so if we were to make sure that there was a higher threshold for what qualifies as an indigent commissary account in this bill, it proposes moving it from $25 to $100. Those folks that are incarcerated would have enough money to buy their essentials from the commissary without turning to alternative ways to find those things. And so this simply says, hey, let's make sure that a very small amount of money, $100, is reserved for these folks. And this isn't money coming from the state. This is when family puts this into their account, or the salary from their work that they're doing in the prison gets deposited into their account. Can't be siphoned off for different fines and fees.
So if I'm in jail and my family is rich and they put $500 in there for me, under the terms of this bill, those $400 in excess of $100 would still be eligible to be tapped by the state for money that these people owe somewhere else.
Correct. And it wouldn't be the full $400. My understanding is it's usually 25 to 50% can be taken out for different types of fees. So that incarcerated person would still get a portion of that money, but not the full money that was put in. But that at least $100 of it would be safe so that they could get their essentials from the commissary.
And when you say that we're responsible for these people, that's true. It's they are in our care regardless of who they are, how they got there. As human beings, we have a responsibility to take care of people that are at our mercy.
For sure.
100%.
For sure.
Representative Street, it's 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon in the second week of the legislative session, which means you've probably been here 20 minutes too long
for
not your
at
schedule.
All.
I really do appreciate you coming by. It may be more or less than 9 months before we get a chance to talk again, but I'm looking forward to it already.
Hopefully far less. Maybe we can do a wrap-up of the session at the end of it.
And that won't be long from now. It's a 60-day session, and
So
we're
be here
already
before you
about
know it.
8 days into it. Thank you for coming by Capital Ideas once again, Representative Chipalo Street from District 37 in Seattle, Washington.
Thanks for having me.
That was Representative Chipalo Street, and that's Capital Ideas for today. I hope you feel like it was 20 minutes well spent. I've got good news, which is that we've made it easier than ever to listen to Capital Ideas on your favorite podcast provider. Capital Ideas has a new homepage where it belongs, on the Washington State House Democratic Caucus website. Just open the HDC website at housedemocrats.wa.gov and click on the media button. You'll find Capital Ideas there going all the way back to the beginning in 2009. As a bonus, you'll see the Speaker's Scoop podcast as well, which is a quick weekly visit with Speaker Lloyd Jenkins. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell strangers. This is your state government. It's no understatement to say that what happens here matters now more than ever before. In every episode, you'll meet people who are working for you, and you'll hear what they're doing. I'm Dan Frizzell for the Washington State House Democrats, putting people first since 1889, the year the first non-segregated hospital in the U.S. opened in Chicago. Thanks for listening.